Let's talk about these Honda generators. This one I have the side cover off because I just changed the oil. So oil is a great place to start. Checking the oil, there's a dipstick down here. Obviously I have to pull the side cover off first, which is just a big nut. I'm sure you can figure that out. There's a dipstick, but it doesn't really mean anything. The manual tells you to make sure it's to the level of the threads. So really, if this thing is sitting level, it's not going to be overfilled with oil. You kind of just want to see it right there at the threads. And you can see a little stripping out because I just filled it up. It's still warm and probably expanding. When you put the dipstick back in, you want to be very careful that you don't cross thread it, because the dipstick is plastic threads going into metal. So it should take almost no effort to thread it in until you get all the way into the gasket, and then just snug it. Doesn't have to be super tight. Control wise, there's a choke up here, which you can see in the panel when it's installed. So if it's cold, obviously you want to put it on choke. Your engine switch, this does everything. Turns on the power and the motor, so it's off. Flip it to on, choke's on, now you just pull the cord. And these things they're pretty, well, they're Honda, so they're pretty reliable. It usually only takes one or two starts, or one or two pulls to get it started. And then when it's done, you just turn it off. Now, choke, yeah. When it's cold, you choke it, let it run for, I don't know, 15, 20 seconds till it starts running rough, and then take the choke back off. The other little feature, Eco Throttle up here, that tries to match the speed of the generator to the electrical demand. So if you just started it and you have the Eco Throttle on, it's going to idle, which is good. It's, saving gas. It's not doing any load, so it doesn't really need to be working very hard. And then when you plug something into it and start to put load on it, wanting some power, it'll speed up the motor, in theory proportional. And you'll notice that if you turn the Eco Throttle off, then it just runs wide open, full throttle. Whether you want it on or off depends on what you're using it for. If you're doing something very low draw, like charging batteries or running the PA, which is what it usually gets used for, or even high draw if it's consistent, like the pump in the stream, something where whatever it's powering is going to come on, run for a while, and then turn off and be done, you can just leave it in Eco Throttle. The only reason you might want to take it out is if you're using like a saw or a drill or something that's starting and stopping a lot. It's going to, when a motor first starts, it's better to have the generator spinning up to speed. But generally, most of what we do around here, Eco Throttle is fine. The other very important thing to talk about is the fuel cap. Notice it has a position that says off and on. I used to have them highlighted. There was a note here that sort of explains what you need to do. Since we live in the 21st century and ethanol is a fact of life, it's very important to keep ethanol gas isolated from air, because it pulls moisture out of the atmosphere, and that causes a whole bunch of problems. So in theory then your gas tank should just seal up completely and not let any air in, right? Well, the problem is, as you run, gas has to come out. You need to replace that volume of gasoline with air, so you don't want to create a vacuum. Most gas tanks, the caps are vented to allow air in. So what Honda did on these is they have a switch that right now it's in the off position. So the breather valve is closed, so there shouldn't be any air coming in. If you run it, yeah, it's going to run for a while until it needs to get some air replacing the displaced gas in the tank, and then it's going to shut down. The real easy fix to that is you just flip it over to on, and you'll probably hear it hiss. If you're using either of these generators and they shut off unexpectedly after they've been running for a while, check the gas cap, make sure it's in the on position, which ideally you want to put it in the on position before you start it, but it gets forgotten about. And if when you switch it from off to on and you hear air hissing in, you can be pretty sure that was the problem. You might give it a second or two to let air in and gas get back to the fuel pump. But a couple pulls, it should start up and should be good to go again. The important thing is when you shut it down, flip it back to off. And also make sure that your fuel cap is nice and tight. I try to treat all of our gas with Startron. That's what I use myself. I've never had an ethanol problem with gas that's been treated. The cool thing about this stuff, it says on it, here, overdosing is not harmful. So generally speaking, that means I want to put in more than it needs, because why not? I'll do a video one of these days showing some of the damage ethanol has done, and I'm always battling against bad gas. So this comes in different concentrations. This is one of the more concentrated ones. This whole bottle will treat 512 gallons. It's got directions, 1 ounce for every 8 gallons. So personally, what I do when I get 5 gallons of gas for myself, I pour what I think is about an ounce in, and then I pour another what I think is about an ounce in. Because overdosing is not harmful. Can't hurt. It's throwing away a little bit of money. But you know what? Buying an extra bottle of this is a lot cheaper and a lot more convenient than having to buy a new carburetor because it got eaten up, or having your machine not work when you want it to. So I really like it. I don't know if anybody else around the farm uses it. I always try to keep at least one bottle up here in the shop. There's actually, oh look, there's 2 bottles right now. Overdosing is not harmful, so use it. That's what it's here for. I guess that's about all I have about generators and Startron. The camouflage Honda generator that looks just like this, but it's camouflaged, works the same way. We never know where it is. It's really good at hiding. Quick little addendum about the generators. One, there's a little picture here that shows you your oil level. See how the dipstick really doesn't mean anything. Also, in terms of using it, I always like to let the generator get up to speed before I plug anything in or before I put any load on it. Just that way you're starting with all the voltage whatever you're using wants to have. I believe when you turn it off, it kills the power too, so you're not going to give any appliance, low voltage and potentially damage it. But for starting it up, you don't want to have something plugged in that is not on a switch that's immediately going to put a load on it as the generator starts to start. Because for one, it's going to be a little harder for the motor and the generator to start under speed, but also whatever's plugged into it is not going to be getting a full 120 volts when it first starts up. So just to be on the safe side, any generator, I like to make sure it's running before we put any kind of load in it, and then before I turn it off, unplug the load. I put this one on Eco Throttle if it hasn't been, let it idle just a little bit, and then turn it off. Here's kind of what I was talking about with the camouflaged generator hiding out here. Fuel vent is on, and the pump and the stream is plugged in. So as soon as it starts, it's going to be trying to start the pump. If it starts. So, choke on, load off, ignition on. Guess I should see if there's any gas in it. Oh, very, very little bit. Maybe there's something. It's also not sitting very level, but these Hondas have oil pressure sensors, so if it's not level enough to pump oil right, in theory it shouldn't start, or it should shut itself off. Well, there it goes. Here it's running rough, so now ease the choke off. Now if we take the economy throttle off, you'll hear it rev up. And then you'll probably hear the load when the pump starts. And hopefully it's pumping. Oh yeah, it's pumping. I always like to overflow the tank a little bit just to try to get some of the floating algae out. You can see, oh yeah, look at those chunks coming out. So that's good. So for shutting down the generator, we're going to take the load off of it first. Hit the econo throttle, let it idle. And then turn it off. And then turn off the fuel breather.